Deep beneath the foundations of the modern world, hidden inside old factories and forgotten industrial sites, there are machines that look almost ordinary. Rusting wheels, silent gears, heavy iron frames. Machines that seem small compared to the giants of today. But one of these forgotten inventions changed the course of human history. It did not move mountains. It did not cross oceans. It did not carry thousands of tons of material. Instead, it did something far more powerful. It changed the relationship between humans and machines, forever. The machine was the steam engine, a device that transformed heat into motion. A machine that took energy, locked inside fuel, and turned it into mechanical power. Today, the principle seems simple, but before this invention, nearly everything humans built depended on natural forces. The wind, the water, the muscles of animals, the strength of human labor. Factories had to be built beside rivers. Mills depended on weather. Production was limited by nature itself. Then the steam engine arrived, and suddenly, industry was no longer forced to wait for the world around it. Power could be created anywhere, at any time. For the first time in history, humanity had a machine capable of producing its own mechanical force on a massive scale. This invention helped create the factories, railways, mines, and cities that define the modern age. It powered an industrial revolution that changed how people worked, traveled, and lived. But beneath the story of progress was another story. Because the steam engine did not only create opportunity, it created a new industrial system. A system built around constant production, factories that never truly slept, workers who followed the rhythm of machines, cities that grew around smoke, steel, and endless demand. The machine promised freedom from old limitations, but many people found themselves trapped inside a new kind of world, a world measured by output, by efficiency, by the speed of the machine. The steam engine became a symbol of human ingenuity, but it also became a symbol of the hidden cost of industrial progress. The question is not simply how this machine changed civilization. The deeper question is, what did humanity have to sacrifice to create the modern world? Because the steam engine did not just power an industrial revolution, it created the system that would shape nearly every part of human life that followed. Welcome to History Forged. This channel explores the rise of industry, the evolution of engineering, and the people who worked inside the world's most powerful machines. If that sounds interesting, subscribe and join us for more industrial history and engineering documentaries. Before the steam engine transformed the world, humanity lived within a powerful but limiting boundary. Nature decided the pace. For thousands of years, civilizations had learned to use the forces around them. Rivers turned water wheels. Winds pushed ships across oceans. Animals carried loads. Human hands built, shaped, and produced. These systems were remarkably effective. They created empires. They built cities. They connected distant civilizations. But they all shared the same weakness. They depended on conditions humans could not fully control. A river could provide power, but only where the river existed. A windmill could work, but only when the wind arrived. A horse could pull a cart, but only as far and as long as the animal could endure. The world before industrialization was not without technology. It was without reliable, concentrated power. And as societies grew, this limitation became impossible to ignore. The demand for resources increased. Cities became larger. Trade expanded. Population growth created pressure for more food, more materials, and more goods. Humanity was reaching the limits of the old system. The problem was especially visible underground. Mining had always been one of the most difficult industries. Beneath the surface were the materials that civilizations depended on: coal, iron, salt, copper, the resources needed to build tools, weapons, buildings, and eventually machines. But the deeper miners went, the more difficult extraction became. Early mines were limited by a simple enemy: water. As miners dug deeper into the earth, groundwater began flowing into the tunnels. At first, workers could remove water using buckets and manual pumps. But as mines expanded, the problem became overwhelming. A mine could contain valuable resources, but if it filled with water, those resources became unreachable. The earth was hiding what humanity needed, and the deeper humans went, the stronger the resistance became. This was the problem that pushed engineers toward a new solution. The challenge was not simply removing water, it was finding a way to create continuous power. A machine that could work without depending on wind, rivers, or human strength. Something that could operate anywhere. Something that could transform one form of energy into another. The idea of using steam was not new. For centuries, people had experimented with the power of heated water. Everyone understood that steam could create pressure, but turning that pressure into useful, controlled mechanical motion was another challenge entirely. The first attempts were crude. Early steam devices were inefficient. They consumed enormous amounts of fuel. They were expensive. They were difficult to operate. They were not yet the machines that would transform civilization, but they revealed something important. Heat could become movement. Energy could be stored and directed. The barrier between nature and machinery was beginning to break. The breakthrough came from solving a very specific industrial problem. The mines needed a reliable way to pump water. Not occasionally, not when conditions allowed. Continuously. Every hour. Every day. A machine that could keep working long after a person became exhausted. This need created the first practical steam engines. The early engines were not built to power factories. They were not designed to move trains. They were built because mines were flooding. A problem beneath the earth forced humanity to create a technology that would eventually reshape the entire surface world. This is one of the great patterns of industrial history. The inventions that change civilization often begin as solutions to very specific problems. A machine appears because someone needs to solve something urgent, but once that machine exists, society discovers new uses for it. The steam engine began as a mining tool, but it would become something much larger. The key was not only the machine itself, it was the new idea behind it. Power no longer had to come from the environment. It could be generated, controlled, moved, sold. The engine created a new relationship between humans and energy. Instead of building industries around natural power sources, industries could now be built around machines. Factories no longer needed to follow rivers. Production could move into cities. Manufacturing could expand beyond previous limits. The location of industry changed. The rhythm of work changed. The scale of production changed. But before the steam engine became the symbol of a new age, it had to overcome one major obstacle. The machine was powerful, but it was not yet practical. It was expensive, unreliable, and dangerous. The first engines were not elegant examples of engineering perfection. They were massive experiments made of iron, pressure, and ambition. They leaked. They broke down. They demanded constant attention. They consumed enormous amounts of fuel, and the people who operated them entered a new industrial world where machines were no longer just tools. They were becoming the center of human activity. The steam engine had solved one problem, but it was about to create a much larger transformation. Because once humans learned how to create their own power, there was no longer any limit to where industry could go. The steam engine did not arrive as a finished revolution. It began as a desperate answer to a difficult problem. The early machines were not the sleek symbols of progress that later generations would imagine. They were enormous iron structures, built around a simple idea: use steam pressure to move something. At first, that something was usually a pump. The goal was not to create a new world. The goal was to keep mines from filling with water. But the engineers who developed these early engines unknowingly opened a door that could never be closed again. Because once steam could do the work of muscles, animals, and natural forces, the limits of production began to change. The first major step came from improving reliability. Early steam engines wasted huge amounts of energy. They heated and cooled parts of the machine repeatedly, losing power in the process. The machines worked, but inefficiently. They required enormous quantities of fuel. They demanded constant maintenance. For many industries, they were too expensive. The steam engine needed refinement before it could escape the mines and enter the wider world. That transformation came through generations of engineering improvements. The engine became more efficient. The mechanisms became more precise. The conversion of heat into motion became more controlled. A machine that once existed only as a pumping device slowly became a general source of power. This changed everything. Because the most important feature of the steam engine was not simply what it could do. It was where it could operate. Water power had always forced industry to follow geography. Factories needed rivers. Mills needed streams. Production was tied to landscapes. Steam broke that connection. A factory could now be built where people, markets, and transportation existed. Power could be brought to the workplace. The workplace no longer had to move toward the power. This created a completely new industrial environment. The factory. Before industrialization, production was often scattered. Skilled workers created goods in small workshops. Families produced materials from home. Craftsmanship depended on individual ability. But steam power encouraged something different: centralization. Machines became larger. Production became faster. Workers gathered around powerful equipment that could operate continuously. The factory became the new center of economic life. Inside these buildings, the sound of industry changed. The old sounds of hand tools and individual labor were replaced by something mechanical: pistons moving, belts turning, metal striking metal. A new rhythm controlled the workplace. The rhythm of the machine. This was the beginning of the industrial system, and the steam engine was its heart. The expansion did not happen because society simply wanted bigger machines. It happened because the world had created new demands. Population growth meant more goods were needed. Trade networks expanded. Armies required weapons and supplies. Cities needed materials. Businesses wanted faster production at lower cost. Steam power offered a solution: more output, more speed, more control. Industries that adopted steam gained advantages over those that did not. Textile production changed dramatically. Factories using steam-powered machinery could produce cloth faster than traditional methods. The production of iron and steel expanded. Coal mining grew, because coal was not only a resource anymore, it was the fuel that powered the entire system. This created a powerful cycle. Steam engines increased demand for coal. Coal increased the availability of steam power. Steam power increased industrial production. Industrial production created even greater demand for resources. The machine had become part of a system that continuously expanded itself. But expansion came with consequences. The new factories required workers, large numbers of workers. And unlike older forms of labor, factory work was organized around the needs of the machine. The worker no longer controlled the pace of production. The machine did. A craftsman could decide the rhythm of their work. A factory worker had to follow the rhythm of the engine. The industrial clock replaced natural cycles. Work was no longer simply about completing a task. It was about maintaining continuous production. This changed human life. Entire populations moved toward industrial centers. Cities grew rapidly around factories. People who once lived in rural communities entered crowded urban environments, searching for wages. The steam engine did not just transform industry, it transformed society. But the machine that created opportunity also created new forms of dependence. Workers needed factories. Factories needed workers, and the relationship between the two was often unequal. The same engine that powered economic growth also powered a new labor system, one where efficiency and production became the highest priorities. The factory owner saw the steam engine as a way to increase output. The worker experienced it as a force that reorganized daily life, and the people closest to the machine discovered that progress had a cost. The steam engine created wealth, but it also created pressure, long working hours, dangerous conditions, a new separation between those who owned the machines and those who operated them. The Industrial Revolution was often described as a triumph of invention, and it was. But inventions do not exist alone. They create systems, and systems create winners and losers. By the 19th century, the steam engine had moved far beyond the mines where it began. It was powering factories, ships, and railways. It was changing the speed of civilization itself. The machine had escaped its original purpose. But now, another question emerged. What happened when humans built a world that depended on machines that never stopped? The steam engine changed the world because it did more than provide power. It created a new way of organizing human activity. Before steam, machines were usually assistants. They helped people. They extended human ability. But the industrial steam engine was different. It became the center of the workplace. The factory was no longer a building where machines existed. It became a system designed around the machine. Every part of the environment adjusted itself to keep the engine working. Fuel had to arrive. Workers had to operate equipment. Raw materials had to be processed. Products had to leave. The engine was not one invention. It was the beginning of a network, and that network changed the meaning of work. Inside a steam-powered factory, the machine controlled the pace. The movement of pistons and belts determined the rhythm of production. A worker could not simply slow down when tired. The machine continued. The system continued. Production continued. The industrial world had discovered a new source of power, but it had also created a new source of pressure. The steam engine itself was a masterpiece of mechanical engineering. Its operation depended on a carefully controlled balance between heat, pressure, and movement. Coal was burned in a furnace. The heat transferred energy into water. The water became steam. The expanding steam pushed a piston. The piston moved machinery. A simple chain of transformations. But each step required precision. Too little pressure, and the engine lost power. Too much pressure, and the machine became dangerous. The early industrial world was built around controlling this invisible force. Steam could be powerful, but steam could also be deadly. The boiler was the heart of the system. It contained the pressure that made everything possible. And it was also one of the greatest dangers. A damaged boiler could become an explosion waiting to happen. Metal could fail. Pressure could rise beyond safe limits. A machine designed to create power could suddenly release that power violently. Workers near these machines lived with this reality. The steam engine was not a distant technology. It was physically present, loud, hot, moving, demanding attention. The people who worked around it had to understand the machine. They listened for unusual sounds. They watched pressure gauges. They inspected parts. They learned the behavior of the engine through experience. A skilled operator could sense problems before they became disasters. The machine had a personality, not a human one, but a pattern of behavior that workers learned to recognize. A change in vibration, a strange noise, a drop in performance. Small signs that something was wrong. This relationship between humans and machines became one of the defining features of industrial society. The machine was powerful, but humans were still responsible for maintaining it. The steam engine did not remove human involvement. It reorganized it. Instead of workers controlling their own tools, they increasingly became part of a larger mechanical process. A person was no longer judged only by craftsmanship. They were judged by how well they fit into the rhythm of production. The factory system created a new kind of efficiency. Tasks were divided. Specialization increased. Workers performed specific roles repeatedly. This allowed factories to produce goods at unprecedented speeds. But it also changed the experience of labor. A traditional craft worker might create an entire product from beginning to end. A factory worker might perform one movement thousands of times a day. The machine created consistency, but it also created repetition. The industrial system valued reliability. A machine does the same thing again and again, so the workplace began expecting humans to do the same. This was one of the deepest changes caused by the steam engine. It did not just power machines. It changed the relationship between people and time. Before industrialization, many communities organized life around natural patterns: daylight, seasons, agricultural cycles. The factory introduced a different measurement: the clock. Time became something that could be divided, controlled, and sold. An hour was no longer simply part of the day. It became a unit of production. A factory owner measured output. A worker measured wages. The engine transformed time into an industrial resource. And this created a completely new society. Cities expanded around factories because workers needed to live near their jobs. Industrial centers grew rapidly. Buildings, roads, transportation systems, and entire communities formed around production. The steam engine had changed where people lived, but the transformation came with a cost. The growth was often faster than the cities could handle. Industrial neighborhoods became crowded. Living conditions were difficult. The same factories that created economic opportunity also created environments where workers struggled. The machine increased productivity, but it did not automatically improve human life. That required another struggle. A struggle over working conditions, safety, and the rights of the people who kept the machines running. Because the steam engine had created something unprecedented, a society where machines could produce more than ever before, but also a society where millions of people depended on those machines for survival. The engine had solved the problem of limited power, but it created a deeper question. What happens when human beings build a world that moves at the speed of machinery? And as the factories expanded, one group carried the greatest burden of this new industrial age. The workers who stood closest to the engines, the people whose lives were measured by the sound of pistons, gears, and boilers. Because the greatest invention of the Industrial Revolution was not only a machine, it was a system, and inside that system, every person had a role to play. The steam engine promised a future where machines would free humanity from old limitations. It delivered that promise, but it also created a new reality that few people were prepared for. The industrial world moved faster than human life could adapt. Factories expanded. Production accelerated. Cities filled with workers searching for opportunity. The machine had created wealth on a scale never seen before. But wealth and comfort did not arrive equally. The people who operated the engines often experienced the Industrial Revolution differently from those who owned them. For factory owners, steam power represented possibility. A single machine could replace countless hours of manual effort. Production increased. Markets expanded. Businesses grew. The engine seemed like proof that technology could solve any problem. But inside the factories, workers experienced another side of the transformation. The machine became the center of their lives. The workday was built around its operation. When the engine ran, the factory ran. When the factory ran, workers were expected to keep pace. The industrial system demanded consistency. A machine does not become tired. A machine does not need rest. And as factories became more dependent on mechanical power, human workers were increasingly expected to match the rhythm of the machines around them. This changed the nature of labor. In earlier forms of production, workers often controlled the process. A craftsperson understood the entire object they created. They chose their methods. They adjusted their pace. They carried knowledge developed through years of experience. Factory work was different. The process was divided. The worker became one part of a larger operation. A person might spend an entire day performing a single repetitive action. The machine did not need creativity. It needed reliability. And the industrial system began rewarding those qualities: speed, discipline, endurance. The same characteristics that made the factory efficient also made the work physically and mentally exhausting. The factory environment itself was difficult. The steam engine produced constant noise. The machinery moved continuously. The air could be filled with smoke, dust, and particles from industrial processes. Workers operated around moving components that could injure them if they lost concentration for even a moment. Safety standards were often limited. Industrial expansion happened faster than regulations could keep up. The machine was new. The risks were new. Society was still learning how to control the power it had created. The steam engine also transformed the lives of children. Because factories required workers, and because many tasks did not require advanced training, children became part of the industrial workforce. They were smaller. They could move into tight spaces. They could perform repetitive tasks. And they could be paid less. The same system that produced incredible technological progress also created environments where vulnerable people were exposed to dangerous conditions. Children worked near machinery. They worked long hours. They entered an industrial world designed for production, not protection. This became one of the darkest contradictions of the Industrial Revolution. A period celebrated for human achievement was also a period when many workers experienced exploitation. The machine itself was not cruel. It had no intention. But the system built around it prioritized output. And when production became the measure of success, human limits were often treated as obstacles. Workers were not only affected physically. The factory also changed the structure of daily life. The old relationship between work and home began to disappear. Production moved from workshops and households into centralized factories. Families became dependent on wages. Communities reorganized around industrial schedules. The sound of the factory whistle became a signal that controlled the day. Time itself became industrial. People woke according to shifts. Meals were organized around production schedules. Rest became something placed between working hours. The steam engine had changed not only what people did, it changed how they lived. But the human cost was not only found in factories. The expansion of steam power required enormous quantities of fuel. Coal became the foundation of the industrial age, and coal mining became one of the most important industries in the world. Thousands of workers entered mines to supply the fuel that powered factories. They faced dangers underground: collapses, explosions, poisonous gases, flooding. The steam engine created a demand for coal. The demand for coal created an industry that placed workers in some of the most dangerous environments on Earth. The machine above ground depended on the labor below it. This was the hidden structure of industrialization. The clean movement of a piston represented a much larger chain of human effort. Somewhere, someone had extracted the fuel. Someone had transported it. Someone had maintained the machine. Someone had endured the conditions that made the system possible. The steam engine was often presented as a triumph of invention, and it was. But inventions do not exist outside society. They reflect the priorities of the world that creates them. The Industrial Revolution valued expansion, efficiency, production, growth. The human consequences became visible only later. Workers began demanding safer conditions. They organized. They challenged the idea that productivity mattered more than human life. Over time, laws changed. Workplace standards improved. Child labor restrictions expanded. The relationship between workers and industry slowly transformed. But these changes did not happen because the machine became kinder. They happened because people forced the system to recognize something it had ignored. The worker was not just another part of the machine. The steam engine had created a new world. But that world had to learn how to protect the people living inside it. And eventually, another question emerged. If steam power had transformed civilization so completely, what would happen when an even more powerful source of energy appeared? Because the machine that started the Industrial Revolution would eventually face its own replacement, and the age of steam would become the foundation for the next great transformation. The steam engine did not disappear because it failed. It disappeared because it succeeded. The machine that once seemed impossible had accomplished what its creators hoped it would do. It changed the world. It transformed how energy was produced. It reshaped industry. It connected cities. It accelerated civilization. But every successful technology eventually creates the conditions for something beyond itself. The steam engine had unlocked a new industrial age, and that age would eventually demand even more. More speed, more efficiency, more control. The same desire for improvement that created the steam engine would eventually lead engineers toward new sources of power. The future of industry would not belong to steam forever, but the world steam created would never disappear. Its legacy was not just the machines it powered. It was the entire industrial system it introduced. The rise of factories, the expansion of cities, the transformation of transportation, the creation of mass production. The modern world was built on the foundation laid by steam. Before steam, energy was limited by location. After steam, energy could be produced where it was needed. This single change reshaped civilization. Factories no longer had to depend on rivers. Manufacturing could expand into cities. Industries could grow larger. Production could increase beyond anything previous generations had experienced. The steam engine turned energy into something that could be controlled and distributed. It became one of the foundations of modern economic life. But the machine also left behind a complicated legacy. Because the industrial system it created contained both achievement and consequence. Steam power helped create prosperity. It also helped create some of the most difficult social challenges of the modern era: rapid urban growth, industrial pollution, worker exploitation, a new relationship between humans and machines. The steam engine showed humanity that technology could overcome old limitations. But it also revealed a new problem. Every new capability creates new responsibilities. The ability to produce more did not automatically answer how production should be managed. The ability to build larger machines did not answer who would benefit from them. The ability to transform landscapes did not answer what would happen to those landscapes afterward. These questions became central to the modern world. As new technologies replaced steam, the old engines slowly became symbols of a previous age. Electric motors offered new advantages. They were cleaner and easier to control. Internal combustion engines created new possibilities for transportation. New energy systems began replacing the massive infrastructure required by steam. Factories changed. Transportation changed. The world moved on. But the influence of steam remained. The principles developed during the age of steam continued to shape engineering. The idea of converting energy into mechanical work. The organization of industrial production. The relationship between machines and workers. All of these survived. The steam engine was not just an invention. It was the beginning of a way of thinking, a belief that problems could be solved through engineering, that nature could be controlled through technology, that human limitations could be overcome by machines. And in many ways, that belief created the modern world. The buildings around us, the transportation systems we rely on, the industries that produce everyday goods, all of them trace part of their history back to the moment when humans learned to turn heat into motion. But the story of the steam engine also contains a warning, because the same machine that expanded human possibility also created a pattern that repeated throughout industrial history. A new technology appears. It solves a problem. Society reorganizes around it, and only later does humanity confront the consequences. The steam engine was built to remove limits, and it succeeded. It removed the limits of human strength. It removed the limits of geography. It removed the limits of traditional production. But it also created new limits. Limits of pollution. Limits of resources. Limits of how much pressure people could endure inside an industrial system. Today, many surviving steam engines are preserved. Some sit in museums, some remain in old factories, some are restored and operated as reminders of another age. When people look at them now, they often see craftsmanship, iron, precision, mechanical beauty, and they should, because the engineering achievement was extraordinary. But the machine deserves to be remembered for more than its invention. It should also be remembered for the world it created. A world where machines became central to human existence. A world where progress and sacrifice became connected. A world where the power to transform nature came with the responsibility to understand the consequences. The steam engine started the Industrial Revolution, but the Industrial Revolution was never only about machines. It was about people, the workers who operated them, the communities built around them, the generations shaped by them, the millions of lives changed by the arrival of mechanical power. The forgotten machine did not simply change how humans worked. It changed what humanity believed was possible. And that may be its greatest legacy, because every modern machine, every factory, every power system, and every technological achievement that followed carries part of the same question first asked by steam. If we have the power to change the world, how should we use it?